in introducing anyone as a professor at MIT, it can be a daunting challenge to someone doing so. So of course I had to look for some inspiration from some other great scientists, and so I think that Albert Einstein perhaps was thinking of someone like Leslie when he said that anyone who has never made a mistake has never tried anything. And I know Leslie has tried maybe every conceivable technology. He's at the forefront and really at the cutting edge of many, many technologies, in particular as they relate to optimizing the use of methanol. So we're very fortunate to have him all the way from Boston, and please welcome Leslie Bromberg. Thank you.
Paul, thanks for that introduction, undeserved. But although, yes, I have made lots of mistakes. But I'm not going to be talking about fusion-powered vehicles, which is what I do on the also at MIT, fusion power. Methanol is a reality. It's just an issue of implementing it. It's probably the best fuel for the U.S., with the exception of the fact that we don't make vehicles, we don't make methanol, and there's no infrastructure to deliver it in the U.S. Otherwise, it's the best fuel ever. So what I'm going to be talking is about options for the very long term. What could you achieve utilizing the spectacular combustion and chemical properties of methanol in the long term, and also an attractive approach as to how to get there, an intermediate approach to get there. That's actually going to be my talk. Yeah, we already know the fact that methanol is a great fuel. In the US, it's very competitive to gasoline and diesel. You would not sell methanol in the US because of lower cost of production. At the pump, it will be very comparable to diesel on a joule basis. In the US, I would say on a BTU basis, but here in Europe, it's on a joule basis. The cost dollars per a gallon gasoline equivalent for methanol, gasoline, and diesel have been very comparable, even though in the US we had expected that shale gas would actually provide a decoupling. But because methanol is a world commodity, it's probably driven by world prices. But we actually see methanol as a way of improving security, energy, and emissions eventually. And I'll be talking about how to do that. Oops. This is not the presentation that I had expected. Okay, but it's okay. This actually shows the cost of a methanol versus a gasoline and diesel, historical from 2000 all the way up to today, and basically they follow each other. Shown are E85, a gasoline, and methanol. Methanol is in the orange, so they're basically very comparable. Renewable methanol. Oh, this is really a different presentation, but okay, it's okay. I actually had sent a different one, but this is the original presentation that when I was talking about sustainability, some work that we did in the U.S. for a sustainable presentation as opposed to implications for efficiency. I'll have to ad-lib. I'll just ad-lib my presentation. There is an option, actually very similar to what's being done in the vehicle, to combine gasoline and methanol. The octane that you need through the engine operating map varies. At light load, you can run with very low octane. At high load, you require high octane in order to prevent knock. Knock is the reason why spark igniting vehicles are less efficient than diesel. Most of that difference is because of the knock. Methanol avoids knock. You could operate a vehicle just on methanol and literally avoid knock throughout the entire engine map, and you could get on the order of 25 to 30% improvement versus gasoline just by operating with downsized engines and direct injection. Direct injection downsized engines, you decrease the size of the engine, but by doing so, you have to increase the charge. You do turbocharge or supercharge in order to maintain power equivalent. When you do that, you gain in efficiency because of the reduction of throttling losses. You lose, you improve the breathing of the engine, and the efficiency improvement that we have actually demonstrated through tests, both at MIT but elsewhere, with the fuels like ethanol, or ethanol gasoline blends, we can get about 25 to 30% improvement in efficiency just by doing that. You could actually do it on a straight methanol fuel. Our approach at MIT has been slightly different. Over most of the map, you don't need a high octane fuel. Gasoline is good enough for most of the driving. It's for operations during a acceleration, a climbing, or towing that you actually require the high octane fuel. Over most of the cycle, in particular for the conventional cycles that people utilize for the test, the highway fuel efficiency test, or the US06 in the US, or NEDC cycles here in Europe and in Asia. For those cycles, the amount of time that the engine operates at very high torque is very limited. During those times where you require high torque, you just use a high octane fuel. Methanol, by our standards, is spectacular in that respect. The only problem maybe is the fact that the fuel volumetric efficiency is relatively low because of the lower heating value per liter for methanol compared to the other fuels. But in terms of the chemistry, it's a spectacular fuel. So we like that approach. You utilize a large tank. It's filled with gasoline for most of the cycle, and a small tank that you utilize with an alcohol, either ethanol. We've been pushing very hard for ethanol in the US just because nobody will listen to methanol. It's nice being in an audience that is willing to listen about methanol. Methanol is even better because of the higher evaporative cooling. That's actually one of the things that does the trick, is the evaporative cooling. That's why we like to directly inject the methanol in the cylinder. So it's direct injection of methanol, pour fuel injection of gasoline. It will result in an improvement of efficiency on the order of 25 to 30%. In present day vehicles, yes, they have to be downsized, turbocharged, and direct injection. You can already utilize almost the present infrastructure. You need a small tank of methanol that will give you on the order of maybe 20% of the volume of the big tank, and you will have to refuel it every 3 or 4 refuelings of the big tank. The consumption over most of the cycle is between 5 and 10% of the gasoline that is consumed, but it allows you a 25% improvement on the fuel efficiency of gasoline. So you're consuming very small amount of alcohol, but reducing the consumption of the gasolines by a substantial 30%. That's one way of getting from where we are with limited availability of alcohol or methanol to one technology where you actually have lots of lots of methanol. So that's actually our vision for technology to go into fuel vehicles that are actually strictly fueled by methanol. So what could you do if you were to go into methanol? And maybe there are some slides in here. Okay. Yeah, what could you do if you were to do it with methanol? This slide shows what we intended to do. A turbocharge, a downsize, a direct injection of the fuel will give you about 30% improvements in efficiency versus gasoline. While consuming on the order of 10%, 15% of methanol, which is great because methanol is in limited availability today. We think it's a much better use of the limited amount of methanol. It would be much better to utilize 10 vehicles that run on 10% methanol in terms of CO2 emissions than utilize one single vehicle that runs fully on methanol. In terms of the CO2 emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, it'd actually be an improved vehicle. So that will get us to something 30% more efficient spark ignited engine that'll be comparable to the diesel engine. So what could we do for the future? Is there something that we can do in order to improve the vehicles even further? And the answer is methanol allows us something that neither ethanol or gasoline allows that, is that it allows operation in a very, dilute operation, very lean. Methanol has very high flame speed. It actually allows you to run lean stoichiometric with low PM emissions would actually be very interesting approach for meeting standards, but it's a little bit more speculative. You still make probably some NOx. You require something like a lean NOx strap or an SCR to solve that problem, and we have some concepts at MIT to try to address NOx emissions in lean stratified methanol engines. And the last trick that one can actually utilize with a methanol is exhaust energy recovery. As opposed to gasoline, the way to reform, I mean, turn the fuel, which is hydrocarbon, is CH2 more or less for gasoline, into hydrogen, into syngas, which is a combination of hydrogen and CO. Hydrogen and CO have a very good combustion properties, but in the case of methanol, the conversion, this reformation is endothermic, and it can be done at low temperature, somewhere between 225 to 250 degrees centigrades. It requires to do the decomposition, and the decomposition is endothermic, which means that it sucks energy out of the exhaust, and the heating value of the hydrogen and CO that is generated is higher by about 10%. So you gain a 10% improvement on the efficiency just on the heating value of the fuel. The hydrogen and CO also gives you some additional possibilities for improved combustions in terms of lean, and clearly in terms of generations of soot. But there is still another opportunity, and that's actually we showed over here. I'm not actually very sure you're familiar with the way how power is generated mostly, is through operating a Rankine cycle. You take a liquid, you pressurize it, you turn it into a gas, in steam in the case of water, then you run a turbine on it, and then you recondense it and you bring it back and you recycle that fuel, that liquid. The operating coolant is usually water for power plants. In the case of methanol, we can utilize an open Rankine cycle where the fuel, methanol, is regenerated by utilizing exhaust, superheated, utilizing the high temperatures in spark ignited engines, even in some lean engines. The temperature is still fairly high. Now you ended up with a high pressure gas, a relatively high temperature that you can either expand in the cylinder and recover that energy through the energy efficiency of the engine, or operate it through a turbine, a turbo generator, make some electricity, then introduce it into the engine. So it's an open Rankine cycle. It doesn't require a recondenser, and it doesn't have to have a very large radiator. We feel that by utilizing that approach, we can obtain an improvement in efficiency around 50% over natural aspirated spark ignited engines. That brings us almost to the point of fuel cells. So this is internal combustion concept that actually can provide efficiencies comparable to that of a fuel cell without the complications of having to store onboard hydrogen and all the chemical issues that are associated with operating a PEM fuel cell on a vehicle. Control of humidity, temperature controls, homogeneous operation of the unit, all those things that are required for PEMs. PEMs are not that simple, I'm trying to say, although the methanol reformer will also be sort of a chemical plant. Let me actually just say, after saying that, conclude with a summary. We think that methanol is a great fuel. In the very long term, you can have internal combustion engines operating almost as efficient as a fuel cell, without the complications of a fuel cells, but with complications of our onboard reformer, which we think is relatively straightforward technology compared to fuel cells. And a path to get from here to there with a limited availability of methanol would actually be to utilize this two-tank approach. We are working at MIT on the straight approach of having 2 tanks that are externally refueled. With in the US E10 and now with M15 approach, we have concepts, and industry has been operating concepts where the E10 is separated into 2 fuels, a low octane fuel and a high octane fuel. Both Toyota and Honda are working on separate concepts, and at MIT we're operating on a 3rd concept for separating the fuels on board. So it's a single fuel separated on board that allow you this 25 to 30% improvement in efficiency. We think that that's a very attractive path moving forward to that panacea where we can actually run on 100% methanol. With that, I apologize for the confusion on the presentations, but hopefully in the website, once it actually is posted, I'll have the actual presentation that discusses these topics. Thank you.
Yes.